Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first presentation of the Landmark College Academic Speaker Series for the 2023-24 academic year. This series has a long-standing tradition at the college, and we'll be hosting 6 guest speakers throughout the academic year, 3 this fall semester, and 3 again in the spring semester, with such fascinating and diverse topics as artificial intelligence in the future, the education and experiences of a non-speaking autistic person, accounts directly from them. This year, the series is being coordinated by the 3 academic deans of the college, of which I am one. My name is John Vitale, and I'm the Dean of the School of Professional Studies and Science, the home school of tonight's guest speaker, for whom I have the privilege of introducing. It has been said that part of becoming an adult is forgetting what we were captivated by as children, forgetting our curiosity, forgetting to ask the but why questions. The same can be said of the field of biology, where once biologists were captivated by the natural world, a world which they could see, touch, and experience with their own senses. Now, it has become a world which is largely mediated through technology. These technologically mediated experiences involve things like supercolliders, gene sequencing machines, and multi-million-dollar federal grants. And while technologically mediated experiences and experiments have given way to the modern world, the sense of wonder that one used to be able to experience with their very own senses has been uprooted by a different, more distant set of experiences. I cannot help but to lament this distancing of the senses from the sparks of wonder that one can experience from the direct contact with the natural world, in unmediated, visceral contact. All of this is by means of introducing our guest speaker tonight, Professor Richard Grumbine. Professor Grumbine. Professor Grumbine is a biologist who has not lost his sense of wonder for the natural world, a visceral sense of wonder that comes from being in nature. Professor Grumbine has been at Landmark College for 33 years, and in that time has fostered learning environments that help reignite and sustain an unmediated sense of wonder about the natural world for his students. Be it with his long-running research into the red-backed salamander and its habitats around campus, leading nature hikes in and around Putney, to the work he will be sharing with us tonight on the creation of a field guide for identifying local wildflowers, Professor Grumbine is a dedicated professor who will no doubt help reignite the sparks in all of you to go out into nature, experience wonder, and start or keep asking those but why questions. It is again my great pleasure to welcome my friend and colleague, Professor Richard Grumbine.
Yay. Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. It's great to see all you awesome people. Thank you for coming out tonight to check out some plants with me. Maybe you'll come along on a walk with me sometime. I'm Rich Grumbine or Richard Grumbine, either way is fine. Associate professor in the natural sciences. And my main goal tonight aligns with something that John said. I want to make you love plants more after tonight's presentation than you already do right now. Because you probably wouldn't have come here unless either you were forced to by an instructor or that you had an interest in plants. And so I hope I can open up that interest and curiosity a little bit more. So great to see you. There are 4 parts to the presentation tonight. The first part is just setting a little context about my project, giving you some background. I'm then going to go through the process that it has, the journey, so to speak, that I've been on to get to this place where I am right here with this book project. And then I'm going to share with you some statistics, if you will, about some of the results I have. I like numbers and I like data, so I had to throw some of that in here. So that's some interesting stuff I hope you'll enjoy. And then finally, some volunteers are going to get a chance to do the work that I was doing. You might have noticed up front here, there are some specimens, and specimens will be distributed, and there will be a chance to identify what they are using the resources I've created, which will be up here. They will not be distributed, but we'll all do this together. But we'll have samples or specimens in our hands. Before I begin, this is my title slide, but I thought I'm going to start with an extra credit question. Who knows what we're looking at here? Is there any brave soul up there that says, I think this is a so-and-so? There's not a whole lot of leaf detail to see, but the flowers are pretty prominent. We have a candidate. Do you want to give it a try?
Sure. Is that a hibiscus?
A hibiscus? It looks a little bit like a hibiscus. Lots of stamens in the middle. Not a hibiscus, though. I'll give it. I see another hand.
It's a guess. Marsh marigold.
Marsh marigold. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. So this is. All right. All right. That's right. You probably know Jamie. Jamie said that he was a wildflower nerd or geek when we chatted a few minutes ago, and now he gets the crown. So, excellent. Okay, so I want to offer my gratitude to some people who are here and some who are not here who helped me along my path. Part of my work was a sabbatical, so I want to thank this Faculty Senate Sabbatical Committee, and if there's any of you here, thank you so much for supporting my project. I want to thank the Lamrock College Research Fund, which has supported me several times in the past 8 years or so, and helped me support some students like Eric, who's sitting right here. Hi, Eric. In helping my project, you'll see how Eric helped. So thank you, Landmark College Research Fund. I also want to thank John Vitale, my colleague, and my former colleague, Brian Young, who were instrumental in helping me decide that I could take this project on and should seek a sabbatical. So thank you, John and Brian. All my natural science colleagues, some of which are here, thank you for your support. Dr. Eden and Gail Gibson Sheffield, were part of thinking this project was worthwhile, so thank you. And finally, my wife, Jane Coleus, who's sitting up here, was a fantastic, ever-present support on this project, and also the mastermind behind much of the fun in this PowerPoint, which I'm not as adept at as she is, and she loves it too, so thank you. Okay, let's see, where do we start here? Oh, this is when it all began. I wonder who that is. I was in here yesterday with Eric Maddy, and he said, oh, that's Carl, your son. And I said, well, not quite. How about going back a generation? That's me at 2 years old with a peony, and my son did look like that. So Eric, I understand that. So I wasn't, even though this suggests that I liked flowers very early on, I really wasn't much of a plant or a nature person until I got to college, actually. And then I chanced upon several opportunities that really turned me on to plants and many other things. So I don't even remember that. I just know the picture, right? Okay, so a little bit of background, little old Putney, Vermont. So for the past 11 years or so, I've been working on various projects that in making, creating, drafting, refining, and publishing identification guides to the plants of Putney. And my main goal for that was to just create a resource for what I call lay people, not experts, not botanists, not scientists, so they could have a way to connect to plants locally without the incredible terminology that some of you may have experienced if you've, in the sciences in general, but in botany there's so much terminology. So I wanted it to be user-friendly, all the work that I've done. I've already worked and finished on two guides already, and they're in the back of the room, which is a good spot for me to point out that Jamie has an awesome display of botany, forest, flower books, including these two guides, which are finished and in the library, available for checkout. At this event, or sometime future in the library. My first one was actually the one on your right, A Winter Guide to the Trees and Shrubs of Putney. That was the first one I worked on. And then secondly, the Summer Guide. So this one helps you identify the trees and shrubs of Putney in the wintertime by looking at twigs and buds and other features that are not about the leaves, not about the bark, just about the twigs themselves. This one is primarily about the leaves, nothing about the bark. So it's for the growing season. So these are two products that I worked on with the support of the Landmark College Research Fund and all these other things. They were self-published and printed locally, and with the Landmark College Research Fund, they were disseminated in the community. So I contacted science teachers throughout the area and gave several copies to as many people as I could. And they're also in the Putney Library, the Westminster Library, the Dummerston Library, the Brattleboro Library. So they got around, and they've been well used, as far as I know. At least I hope so. Let's see. So the purpose of all my work with plants and these guides is I want to share with Putney residents and Landmark students who are Putney residents right now the amazing beauty and diversity of the flora around this town. We have quite a diversity, and I want us to get to know it better so that you can forge a more curious relationship with plants. So that's where I'm coming from in the big picture. We can get down into the weeds pretty easily, but this is really where I'm coming from. So the current project, the tree projects were the past, and the current project is a field guide to the wildflowers of Putney, Vermont. This is, a potential cover of that book, which is a much larger project than anything around trees and shrubs. The key features of this guide, and this guide is not read. There was a little bit of press that suggested that the book was done. The book is not done. The book is almost there. I'll tell you where I am in a minute. But I'm going to describe the key features here of the book. It has photos and descriptive information about the flowering, herbaceous, native, naturalized, and invasive wildflowers of Putney. So I should probably pause here and go into the quotes here to clarify what that means. A native plant that is here, or an herbaceous plant is basically a non-woody plant, first of all. So the trees and shrubs and woody vines don't count. But herbaceous things are things that come up and die from year to year, perhaps from the same base. They could be a perennial or they could be an annual. And if I deem them native, that just means that we think they've been around before European settlement, as far as we know, although that's pretty hard to verify. Naturalized, another category, would be things that we might consider weeds that have been here probably coming with the Europeans on their heels and everywhere else in their agriculture, and have settled in, and you wouldn't know the difference. They're all here. Things like dandelions probably weren't here and now are here. And then finally, invasive. This is kind of like a spectrum. Invasives are recently arrived plants that may be causing some disruptions of some sort. But if you add a few hundred years on to invasives, they're likely to just be naturalized, and they're going to settle in without creating problems. But so it's sort of a sense of time, really, is what this is about. So anyway, I have photos and descriptive information about all those guys, and I collectively call them wildflowers. I also have an introduction to botanical terminology that's essential for using the identification resource and system that are dichotomous keys, which I will present and chat about a little bit later. So those are the three major chunks of the guide right there. And I want to clarify what's not in the guide. There's nothing on sedges, grasses, and rushes, ferns, mosses, woody plants. Trees and shrubs are already done. Woody vines don't count. And also cultivated ornamental garden perennials or annuals, the things that you buy at the garden place and you put in your garden. Those are not native or naturalized or invasive, although sometimes those guys can escape. And if I found them escaped out in the wilds, they count, and they got in my guide. Things like daylilies, which we think of as garden plants, but they're out there on their own. And you may have seen them on roadsides nowhere near anybody's house, and they can do just fine. And there's several of those kind of things that just pop up on their own and move around on the route to becoming naturalized from people's gardens. Okay, so a little bit of, that's some background. The beginning of the project, here we are, fall 23. I remember this day very clearly. It was sometime in June 2019. I was all by myself, and I was sitting at my dining room table and alone, and I was wondering, okay, what am I going to do now? Do I have another project in me? And I thought around, I said, well, I've done the trees, and there's winter and the summer, trees and shrubs. Woody vines isn't really enough. And I thought, well, maybe I can do herbaceous wildflowers. And I almost stopped myself because it's such a massive, massively larger task to deal with the herbaceous plants than it is to the trees. There are about 70 trees and shrubs. There are closer to 400-ish herbaceous plants. So I almost decided that this was not for me. I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, but I guess that's not what happened. So I dove in, and I remember the first thing that I did, which this isn't the real thing because I lost them, I sat down and I brainstormed. So think about any project you've been involved in, one of the first things you do is you brainstorm. And so I just sat there with a piece of paper and I said, what do I already know? And I made a list of all the herbaceous wildflowers that I had encountered over the years that just were caught up in my memory. And this is, kind of like a simulation of what that was. The next thing I did very soon thereafter is I took this book, some of you may have seen before. It's an excellent book. It's from the 70s, Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. And I paged through every page and said, oh yeah, I forgot I know that one, or I've seen it. So then I added to my list based on things I couldn't remember. And so I had a pretty good list. In fact, I wish I'd remember how many were on my list. It was probably like 100, 125. And I thought, oh, well, I got a few more to learn, and then I'm pretty much done. Well, that was a false sense of confidence, I think. So from 2019 to 2022, I engaged in I'm going to go out and find, inventory, document whatever I can out there. And so I would collect things, I'd bring them back into the confines of my home where I had access to my computer and any other identification resources, hand lenses and rulers and all the stuff you need. And I tried to identify them. And I would say of 1920, there were 4 growing seasons where I did that work from 2019 to 2022. So all summer and spring, a little into the fall. And I want to point out a couple awesome resources, key resources that I used. There's this great Native Plant Trust website called Go Botany, which is an awesome resource. And they have identification features in here that you can use. So I use them occasionally. I also just looked up things from them. And the botanist who runs this is fantastic. You can even contact him. You can do plant share and go back and forth. So it's a great resource. And also there's a site, Minnesota? Yeah, Minnesota Wildflowers. I didn't know this site existed, but it's a great clearinghouse of information about the flora of Minnesota, which is fairly similar to Vermont. Not completely, but pretty similar. And they have great photos. They have great thorough identification descriptions of plants. So that was a key resource for me. So once I identified something, I had to create sort of a database or kind of an organizational system for how I'm going to document things. So I got into Excel and I would get the scientific name down, and I chose 8 categories or 8 characteristics of flowering plants, and I would categorize them into whatever options there were. So you can see here the categories are laid out, and you're going to see them later on when we look at some plants. There's 4 features of flowers. There's color, structure, petal number, and arrangement, and those things all mean something. And there's several possibilities within each of those categories. You can see some of the language I used. And then I also used 4 characteristics of leaves: their arrangement, their design, their edges, and their shape. And then Excel allowed me to sort all these, which is why you're seeing all the blue colored ones together. And that really helped me sort and organize my eventual identification system. And that was fantastic. So that was as long as 358, however many rows of those there are. So that took a while, but it was a great thing to do. I'm glad I chose to do that somewhere along the line. The other thing I had is what I call a little bit of quandary about photographs. There were so many plants, I said, I can't take photos of all these plants. That's going to take me a long time. And so I can't remember how I found out about this fantastic resource, but there is a nonprofit organization, maybe many of you know it, called Creative Commons. And they connected to Wikimedia Commons. They make available copyrighted works of art, or all kinds of works, including photos of everything. And under a licensing agreement, you can sort of borrow that and give credit under the licensing agreement to someone else's work. And so you can go to Wikimedia Commons and you can search for Joe Pyeweed. And you can find, unfortunately, you can find like 150 photos of Joe Pyeweed. And so you get to go to the candy shop and decide which ones you're going to use. And which ones suit your purpose. So I spent a lot of time here, and there's another place called iNaturalist, which has a different role, but they use the Creative Commons licensing information, so you can borrow photographs for use through iNaturalist as well, and there are even more of them. I mean, it's uncanny how many photographs people take and upload into these systems. So between these two places, I found a lot of photos that I could use, and I also took many of my own. And they're all, you'll see in my attribution page how that works. So come summer 21, I had enough data in my system that I could use some help. And so some of you know this gentleman. Is he here? No. He's not here. This is Liam Miller, who was a summer intern 2 years ago. And he was interested he's an art student, if I'm not mistaken, and he was interested in the graphic design. And I said, great, I want you to take my drafts of my photo pages and my plant information, and I want you to use Microsoft Publisher and draft out those so that I don't have to, and that you get paid and that you have a good time. It was a great relationship. So this is the kind of thing that Liam created. You know, I had photos in a file and I had names, and I would just plug him this or give him this raw information, and he turned these into publisher pages after we decided on a model. So this is sort of a classic publisher page for Marsh Marigold, where we can then see the leaves. And so you'll see another one of these later, but that's what Liam was up to. At that point, I think I only had 250 plants or something like that. So he made maybe 60% of all the ones that had to be made, 2 years ago, and I did the rest eventually, as you'll see. So for these 3 seasons, I kept going out inventorying species. I would just choose what part of town I'm going to visit this day. Oh, I think I'm going to go down to River Road and walk along the railroad tracks and see what I can find. Or I'm going to go down to the Putney Landing at the Connecticut River. Or I'm going to go to Putney Mountain. I just went all over different walks expecting to find things. And I did. I also took photos. I kept searching for the best photo I could in Wikimedia Commons and iNaturalist. And I furiously wrote text for each species. And that is what I was doing as sort of prep work to get the guide going.
Why do you say you wrote furiously?
I'm joking. Just like this person looks furious, like fast, not anger, but anyway, another use of the word furious. And so then there's a major transition here. Wow, does that look like Putney? I don't think so. Somewhere in Arizona. Yeah, awesome.
That was just a guess.
That's pretty good. Somewhere in Arizona is pretty good. So in 2 years ago, October 2021, I was encouraged to apply for a sabbatical, and I did so. And in January of 2022, it was granted by the president, and it took place last winter. So there was sort of a long period of time there. So the winter of 2023, January on, and because on a sabbatical, a faculty is, has a project in mind, and completes the project, but has no obligations to the college other than the project itself, essentially, which is really nice. And so Jane and I were able to go somewhere where I could work on this. It didn't have to be cold little Putney of Vermont. All I needed was my computer. All my field work was done. This was all like the text and the graphics and all that stuff. So we went to just outside of Tucson, Arizona. And I just noticed, looks like there's a little bird on that cactus over there on the right side. So those are the Santa Catalina Mountains, and these are cholla cacti and beaver tail cacti and saguaro. So I wasn't working on the plants of Arizona, but I certainly was enthralled by them. And so, where are we going next? Oh, this is just for, it wasn't like summer there. This is snow on the car. We had 2 events of snow where we had 1 inch of snow on the car in Tucson, Arizona. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the pieces of my project that I completed, worked on during my sabbatical. So these guides are identification guides. So I had to come up with a basic system for how is a user who has a specimen and they don't know what it is, how are they going to start? What's the first thing they need to find out? So I decided that I was going to use color, because color is important for flowers and we tune into color. And so I created 8 color groups, they're called, and that's the first decision that anybody makes before they go further in my identification system. So I decided on the color groups. These are all just examples of the colors, and this is a page in the guide. So if you choose that something is a white color, it's going to tell you what page to go to continue on. And you'll see how the rest of that works. It's going to take you to something called a dichotomous key. And some of us may have encountered these before. Basically, it's a tool to help a user identify something that an expert has made for them. And in this case, I'm the expert. I make these. The user could be any of you who say, I want to figure this out, and I'm going to use what this expert made. The keys are usually based on 2 paired statements, and you look at whatever you're observing, and you make a decision about its characteristics, and it takes you down to the next step. So this one's about insects. There's 2 statements there about the wings. And if one of them is a dead end statement, you see the word butterfly, if you get to a dead end, then it says you must have a so-and-so, a butterfly in this case. But if it had small wings, you have another set of choices to choose from. And it just goes and goes and goes until it covers all the species that you want to identify. So this is how many species, like 5 species. But this is the idea of a dichotomous key. And you will see, in the next slide, you ready? This is going to look really scrambly here. Here is my handmade version of one of my dichotomous keys. I have all of them here. These are all my drafts here. They look like this because I've got a lot of plants to put in here. That was 5 things. And so you can see all my marks there. They may mean nothing to you, but they meant something to me. I believe I counted, I have 28 11 by 17 full pages of these things. And that was the second thing I did. After I decided the color groups, I made all these keys, and you can see at the very top, that's the green color group, and that's the beginning of the key, and that's my rough draft. And anything that's circled like here is a dead end name of a plant. And if it's not, there's no dead end, you go to the next set of choices. That's how they work. And you'll see this again, because we're going to practice with one of them. And this was just a fun thing to do. The day I finished, I can't remember how many weeks it took. It probably was 3 or 4 weeks of work.
That makes me a little worried about your work-life balance.
A good call. So that's all of them, and that's like half of them actually, because the other sides of those are also full of text. So that's what it looked like. They're all up here in a nice little packet now. Working on those dichotomous key drafts, and then I digitized them. You'll see that later. I turned all that hand-drawn graphic into a digital, more manageable system for users. So I also finalized those photo pages that Liam started. I took his work and I made it to my qualifications. The common name, we get a scientific name, we get a close-up of a flower, and we get the leaves mostly with flowers, but I couldn't find a great picture of this, so I had to get just the leaves, which are very diagnostic of this plant. Remember those 8 categories? I called them the key features, so these are them lined up. And then I have some additional descriptive information that could be helpful for identification. I have a little thing on habitat and when you might find this blooming. So they all look the same. And there's 2 of these per page. At the end, if you want to come down and see what the whole draft looks like, it's in this binder. This is what Eric was using all summer long, where you can see all these pages laid out if you want to. I also finalized the botanical background section for each of those 8 key features. So this happens to be, I'm just showing you one of them, the flower arrangement. There are 6 options for how herbaceous plants arrange their flowers. And so part of the learning process for a user is to sort of internalize these things or use the guide. If you're not sure what an axillary cluster is, I have text paragraph that describes all of these things. So there's a text section that go along with these photos. So there's a bit of a learning curve for any user here, but it's very lay-oriented and very achievable. Okay, so the other thing I worked on was dealing with all the photos, not just getting them on the pages, but getting their proper attributions. And so I believe the number was 365 photographers were part of this project, which is amazing. And there are 15 pages of these attributions. I might try to make the font size even smaller because that's a lot of text. But they're all in alphabetical order, so the licensing information, the plant, and the name of the person, whether it's a real name like Alex or whatever. There's some that are kind of funny, like Money Matthew 94 Money. You know, I don't know who that is. That's what they wanted to go by. So now we get to the summer 2023. Where I had drafted everything and I needed help. I needed help from users or what I called field testers who would see, how's this system working? If I gave them a plant they didn't know and I didn't name for them and I handed it over to them, could they use my guide and could they figure out what it was and what kind of problems would they encounter and after the learning curve of learning the technology or learning the terminology. So these were my 2 interns, Eric. Thank you, Eric. And Kala, I'm not sure Kala's here. You may know Kala. They worked over June and July primarily, and they helped to identify over 100 plants and field tested 100 plants. I believe their success rate, which means they had no issues, was about 80%, which is an excellent target for a project like this. So those other 20%, the things they had trouble with, we would have these debriefing sessions and I would take their experience and I would fold it back into making changes in language or whatever, photographs, whatever. And so they gave me hours more work. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. And this is a picture of Eric in the lab with a plant. And the way it worked was I would deliver 10 or 15 specimens to them and they would have at it with this resource and they'd take careful notes and then we talk about it some time later and work through it all. And I would take notes and make my changes. So those are all the things that were sabbatical plus, and now I'm almost at the final stretch here. I'm not going to make any more major changes. I just have to do some copy editing of the whole book, which is 300 plus pages. I have to paginate it. The pagination is very involved because there's a lot of cross-referencing everywhere in the book. I have to get it printed and disseminated. And that's all sometime next year. So people want to know when this is going to be done or possibly available. I say maybe a year from now, I hope to be all done everything. So transitioning to some statistics about what I found out. Number of species in the guide. So there's 358 species in the guide with photos and they're all embedded in the keys and you can identify 358 different herbaceous, naturalized, native, you got it plants. However, that number is not accurate in terms of reality. I had to stop my work. I could go on for years and I could keep finding some. In fact, I found 9 species this summer that aren't in the guide. And I had to ask myself, do I want to spend the hours and hours and hours it's going to take to integrate them and embed them in there? And I decided, no, I need to get this finished. I need to move on. But I'm going to make a little addendum in the back that's going to add the 9 species in the appendix somewhere. So color diversity. I'm going to ask the question to the group. There's 8 color groups, but I'm going to give you 4 options here, and we're going to vote. What do you think the most common color of those 358 flowers are? What's got the highest percentage? Here are your choices. Yellow. Is yellow the most common color? Is pink the most common color? Is white the most common color? Or purple? So that's white, yellow, pink, or purple. Raise your hand if you think it's purple, the most common color. Okay, we got some hands. What about pink? We got some hands. All right, what about yellow? A lot of yellows. All right, the yellows have it so far. What about whites? Probably about equal. Let's see what it says here. 35%. So 1 out of every 3 of those 358s are white in color, which actually was a surprise to me. If somebody would have asked me that question, I don't know what I would have said. I would have said there would have been more equal. But 35% are white, 27%, pretty close really, or yellow, and 14% were pink, and purple was probably way down, not even in there. And these are just, now we're getting into the great flower picture part of the program. So if you like pretty pictures of flowers, here we go. I don't need to tell, unless you really want to know, I don't have to tell you who these guys are. And then, so I had 358 species, but how many genera were represented? Let's see. 225 different genera, and the most common genera were violets. There are 9 species of violets, the ones that we think just grow in our yards. Well, that's one. That's only one species. There are 8 other violet species that primarily grow in the woodlands around here. And they're not all purple either. There's purple, white, and yellow in various combinations. So the most common genera are violas or violets. These 2 are tied. There are 8 species of goldenrods or solidagos, and there are 8 species of hawkweeds, which most of us probably don't know, although that's this one over here. They're around on the hillside above the residence halls. There's a bunch of them up there. And then families. I have 63 families represented in all those species. The most common family is the sunflower or the daisy family. That's 75 individuals out of 358 or species. And then the buttercups. The buttercup family is well represented. That's not just buttercups, but its relatives. And then the mustard family, well represented. So, and there are several others. The pea family was in there, the rose family. They were pretty common. And so I also thought it would be interesting to kind of compare the indigenous or the natives versus the non-natives. And so 61% of the 358 species were indigenous, including the ghost pipe, which is a fantastic plant, and the rose pogonia, which grows in bogs. It's an orchid. These are 2 special ones. So I would call them indigenous. Then the non-natives or the naturalized were 39%. And I just have a couple examples of some interesting ones. The burdock, forget-me-nots, which are a good example of a plant that was planted in gardens and now has leaped out and grown all over the place. I see a hand.
A special fact about forget-me-nots. They're actually the state flower of Alaska.
Oh yeah, cool.
So,
and they're probably native to it. They're probably native to Alaska.
I know.
But the ones around here are all neither naturalized, all naturalized. There's no native forget-me-nots. So if you see them out there, they're naturalized. They've been here a long time, but they're not considered native. And then there's 14 species of invasives, including these 2, Hall of Famers right here, the garlic mustard and Japanese knotweed. And I say, according to the state of Vermont has a list of the noxious invasives that we should be looking out for. And so there's 14 species that I found that are on that list, and these are just 2 of them. Then I thought, well, let's do a habitat by habitat comparison. So 3 different habitats. This is open habitat, meaning you got a lot of sun. You get fields, lawns, roadsides, waste places, which is a fair amount of habitat. 63% of species like those kind of open habitats, including the coltsfoot, which is probably the first flowering plant of springtime. And then the forest habitats, the shadier in the forest habitats, 23%, including things like Dutchman's breeches. And then I have one other category, which is wetlands, 14% wetlands, pond edges, stream edges, aquatic marshes, swamps, bogs, something like the pitcher plant, which is an awesome plant, which I didn't even know was one of the plants I didn't think was in Putney. But we have a bog in Putney on somebody's property, and they have awesome pitcher plants. And they have sundews, and they have a few other bog-specific plants. Yes?
So pitcher plants aren't technically native to Vermont? So they're not the ones that are typically on like the range, like those ones, the pitcher plant.
I'm not following. The pitcher plants are native to Vermont.
They are?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so this is a bog that's, with native plant bog.
So then what's the difference between my question is, what's the difference between the tropical pitcher plant versus the native?
Oh, okay. Like many plants, there's a variety of species of the same genus. So I'm guessing that you know of a tropical pitcher plant that's not the same species, but probably the same genus. And maybe it looks similar, but not exactly the same. That's what I'm guessing. I don't know tropical pitcher plants very well.
Instead of like one of the big, like the ones that trap like they're like the Venus flytrap, but they trap like.
Yeah, these guys, same kind of thing. The trap in these guys happens down in this little kind of pocket here. That's the flower, and so there's like a reservoir of water in these pockets, and they things get trapped in there. So the table of contents, I just thought that's what it looks like. There's a few other things I didn't make reference to, and a picture of the guide. So we're transitioning to the last part of our program where we're going to identify a mystery flower. And so I have to go to the controls here. Actually, not yet. Can you help me, please? So I have about 25 of this specimen. So I'm looking for 25-ish volunteers, and you can work with somebody if you're here with somebody. And if you want to be part of this, you're going to come on down, and we're going to hand you a specimen here, and you're going to take it back with you to wherever you are, and they're going to be a little wet. So we're going to shake off some of the water. And so come on down, and you need a ruler too. What happened to the rulers? Do you have them? Okay, you need a ruler too. We're going to take a bunch of them. So come on down. It's going to take us a couple minutes logistically to get this happening. Here you go. Take that. I'm going to put a ruler here. Grab a ruler. Hey, Mary. Take a ruler, take a piece of plant. Take a ruler, take a piece of plant. Come on. They're kind of all trapped. No, I'm going to guide you through all that. Just back to wherever you were and hang in there. I got a few more here. Take a ruler, take a little specimen. Here, take a specimen, take a ruler. I got a few more specimens. And maybe a few more rulers. Michael, come on, here you go. I think that's one. Any other folks? I got one more stem. Okay. Let's get this thing. Okay, so we're transitioning to looking at this thing a little more carefully. The first decision, if you remember, the first decision a user has to make is what color do we have? And I guess the predominant color is what I'm looking for because there's probably some other colors in the flower. We are just talking about the flower. So if you have a...
What? You mean like the color of the petals?
Yes, the flower color of the petals is what I'm referring to. So given all these choices up here, someone raised their hand and offer, I think it should be categorized as a... White. And tell us what. Most of us would agree this is a white flower, though it has a center that's not white. So the predominant color is definitely white. So if this was you in the guide, you'd be directed to a page where you would get a dichotomous key, and we're going there. But since most of us aren't trained in the background, we're going to start there. I have an image of basic flower parts for regular or irregular flowers, and then there's flowers called disc and ray flowers. And that's not something we really need right now, but we'll look at it. But we do need this. There are 6 categories of flower structure. And if you look at what you have here now, again, in the guide, I have text that explains all these. But I can't do that for us completely here. But if you try to find a match of the structure, which one looks like the best match? And raise your hand if you think you've got a good match here. Jacob, what do you got?
Ray and disc.
A ray and disc. Okay, I agree. These things are called ray flowers, and they're sort of on the perimeter, and they radiate around. And then you've got this center. I don't really need to do that. you've got this center of disc flowers. And sometimes there's a flower that just has the rays, and sometimes there's flowers that just have the discs. Sometimes they are combined. And then there's some other choices. So that's where we're going to go. So remember, does someone have a piece of paper or a card or something? If they could pull that out and record the decisions we make, it's going to make it a little easier later. So pull out a piece of paper or your phone, doesn't matter. And there's going to be 6, 8 decisions we make. The first, just write ray and disc, because we're going to need to remember that.
Hold on 1 second.
Sure, and it could be a number of us. So ray and disc is our first decision. For regular flowers only, which this isn't, if we go back here for a second, we chose it wasn't a regular, so this is an irrelevant slide. But if we had a regular flower, we would count the petals. But this is like almost, you can't count them, there's so many. So whenever you get array and disc, there's not really a counting game that goes on. But it does have an arrangement, and there are 6 possibilities. And so if you look at your flower, and you look at these possibilities here, anybody want to wager what they think it is? Fernando.
Terminal cluster.
It is definitely a terminal, a terminal cluster. Let's go back. Where's that thing? Here it is. It's a terminal cluster. It's kind of a zigzag branching pattern that's at the top of the plant. These are axillary, right where the leaves come out. That's not where it is. These are umbels, which are kind of like an umbrella. And spikes, paired, single, those are the other options. So somebody please write down terminal cluster, because we want to remember that decision. Then there's leaf design. Moving on to the leaves. Is it a simple, a compound, or a trifoliate? These can be challenging to determine, but somebody's got a little experience. What do they think? What do you think?
Wait, are we basing leaf design off of how many are attached to the stem?
To the main stem.
Okay, then yeah, it would be simple.
It's definitely simple. Whereas here, this part gets attached to a stem, but then you've got another leaf stalk with multiple leaflets. I don't have an example here to show you. This can be a challenging thing for folks to figure out. Part of the learning curve of learning botanical stuff here. It gets easier, doesn't it, Eric? Thank you. That was the right answer. Leaf arrangement, another part of describing plants is how the leaves are arranged. Is there alternate, opposite, whorled, or basal? Raise your hand if you think you got a candidate here. Go ahead.
Alternate.
They are definitely alternating. They come off in a zigzag pattern. They're not paired next to each other, and there's not a whirl of many of them, or they're just coming out of the ground, and then they're not on the stalk at all. They're just in a rosette, it's called, around the ground. Leaf edges, 4 categories, something called entire, toothed, lobed, or lobed and toothed simultaneously. Somebody I haven't seen yet. Christina, what do you got? Definitely toothed. So people are writing this down, whoever is writing these things down. Then there's leaf shape. Basically wider and round to very thin and line-like and everything in between. This can be a little tricky, but I hope no one says round and no one says linear. What do you think? Raise a hand. What do you think?
Somewhere between elliptical and ovate.
Yeah, somewhere in here. And that's probably good, because remember the plants haven't chosen what category to belong to. We have made the categories, and the categories have fuzzy lines. Right, so that's what makes things a little challenging sometimes. But these are kind of clusters of possibilities. You have to always keep that in mind. Oops, we don't want to go there. Okay, we've looked at all those pieces. Now we're going to look at the key. Hold on to your plants. Whoever wrote down our decisions, we might need you in a minute.
What did we decide on?
Somewhere between elliptical and ovate.
It might be, yeah, sure. Let's leave it at that for now. And if the key asks us, we might have to make a final determination. Okay. So now you get to see what the keys look like. Remember the ones I had drafted out by paper, all like this. Okay, I had to turn these into something usable, right? So there's this little table function here. There's the paired statements. We need to read each paired statement. make a decision. Is it 1A or 1B? And then follow the directions to the next box. So go to 2 or scroll down and go to 10. All right, so the first decision, flowers with either disc or obscure, difficult to determine structure, or are they regular, irregular, or ray and disc?
Ray and disc.
There, we already decided they're ray and disc, so that's combined. Those things are all going to parse out, as you'll see. So where do we go? 10. So our next decision, flowers with ray and disc combined structure, or regular, irregular? What would we choose? We already chose that, right? So here we are again. Now it says go to 11, so the next one down. Are the flowers arranged singly, or are they arranged spikes, axillary clusters, or terminal clusters?
Terminal.
We already decided that. That's why we went through all that. So we sort of previewed. So it's terminal. Where do we go? 12. Let me scroll down a little bit more. Flowers arranged in spikes. Flowers arranged in axillary or terminal. We're back to axillary or terminal, right?
Terminal clusters.
Yeah, and so that takes us to 13. Is the leaf arrangement opposite or alternate?
Alternate.
It was alternate, so we go to 14. Go to 14. Is leaf design simple?
Yeah.
It is. Okay. We're at 16, correct?
Yeah.
Are the leaf edges toothed or are they entire? Well, again, we already looked at that, so we don't have to make a new decision. They are toothed. We go to 17. Ray petal numbers, those are those outer petals, which were defined earlier on. Do they number 50 to 100, or are they 5 to 20? So you have to actually look. What do you think? They look like the 5 to 20, so we're going to 18. Come on, 18. And 18 is what I call a double dead end. So whatever choice we make here, we have our identification, at least we think we do. So last two statements to compare. Flowers 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Now you know why you got a ruler. Across, and across means like width, across the top from one edge to the other. And there's a secondary feature to compare here. The leaves appear whorled below the flower cluster. That means there's around many leaves right under the flower cluster. Or are they 1/2 to 1 inch across? And there's no whorled leaves under the flower cluster.
They're 1.5 to 1 inch.
They're 1/2 to 1 inch. Did we get agreement out there for those who've measured 1/2 to 1 inch? Okay, so then we have landed on, we think this must be the white wood aster, Eurybia divaricata. And so if this was if you had the guide, the whole guide in front of you, the next place you would go is I'm going to go to a picture and get confirmation. So that's what we're going to do. And we are going to here. Current slide. You would turn to the page, there would be a says go to page whatever at that point, and you would get to this information and visuals. Does the visual look like a good match? Looks like a pretty good match, so you feel pretty good, right? It's like, okay, well then I can go and review the key features, most of which I've already decided and said check, 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 but I give additional information. We could, if we had the whole plant, we could measure the whole stem height. We have just further description about the stalks and how the leaves taper to a point. Can you see the leaves kind of have a long pointy tip? And that's all positive, positive. Then we see the habitat, which you guys have no clue about the habitat. I brought it to you. It's the Lewis Building habitat, right? That's where the plant was found. But shady woodland edges, shady roadsides. You may have seen this plant around. This plant is like #1 flowering plant in all of town right now if you go to the right spots. It's all around. And the bloom period is a nice clue. Another verification is if this said April to May as a bloom time, what would you think? I made a mistake, right? But August to September, yeah, right on, check. So all these things would check off and we would pat ourselves on the head or the back and say, yeah, we did it. We identified this plant accurately. So that was all right. Great, well done. So that's how the process works. If you had the entire guide, you would say, all right, I figured out the white wood aster, and maybe I've never seen it before, or I've not noticed it before. I imagine you're going to go out of here now and you're going to look for this thing, because I told you it was just about everywhere. If you want to find it on campus, look for edges, shady edges where the forest meets the developed part of campus. or go to some other spot out in the woods where there's a field, and where that field meets the forest, it's going to be all along the edge there. And it's dominant right now, although it's starting to fade a little bit. And it's very popular with, and this is the last thing I'll leave you with, it's very popular with pollinators. And this is just the beginning. When you connect to plants, you're connecting to a lot more. You're going to start noticing who visits these plants. You're going to notice a lot of other things that are going to lead to more questions and more observations and more joy, which is what it's all about. I think that's the end, but let me make sure I haven't missed a slide here. This was the competitor. I had this here in case somebody chose the see how those leaves look very whirled around? Yeah. That's the competitor that was the other part of the double dead end. And that's the end of our show. All right. Awesome. Last thing, if you can keep your plant. Maybe it'll even last. You can put it in some water wherever you go. If you don't want to keep your plant, this tray here is a repository that's going to go into the compost. And Jacob, can you stand up and show us your decoration? Yeah, you're looking good. You're looking good. And if you want to come chat with me and ask any questions, I'm here for a little while. I'm glad to talk with you. Otherwise, thank you for coming.